Torture and rampant sexual abuse in secret prisons in Yemen. Former detainees say they're being run by the UAE. The Emirates, a key player in the Yemeni war, denies the claims. So what will or can the international community do? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. Today with me, Peter Dobby. 7 former detainees say that the United Arab Emirates is running secret prisons in Yemen and that sexual torture in those prisons is rampant and systematic. The UAE denies the accusations which were made to reporters from the Associated Press news agency. However, the charges highlight both the depth of Saudi and Emirati involvement in Yemen's civil war and the brutality that's become a hallmark of this conflict. We begin with this report from Diana Karim.
A window into what's being described as a world of rampant sexual torture and impunity. These drawings were smuggled out of Emirati-run prisons in Yemen. Made on plastic plates with ink, detainees held without charge or trial described the humiliation to the Associated Press news agency. One caption in Arabic says, "It's real terrorism." In another drawing, prisoners being transported in a pickup truck are naked, blindfolded, and handcuffed. 7 former detainees spoke to reporters about what they've witnessed. They say rape, electrocution, and beatings took place at 5 detention centers, including at the Emirati forces headquarters in the country. The UAE mission in Geneva tweeted that it has never managed or run prisons or secret detention centers in Yemen. But the accusations don't come as a surprise. In March, human rights groups accused the United Arab Emirates of making arbitrary arrests in southern Yemen.
We have documented in the past that the UAE is responsible for forced disappearances, torture, and arbitrary detentions in Yemen.
For months, many residents demanded to know where their missing relatives are. UAE military commanders in Yemen have repeatedly denied running secret prisons there.
After our reporting, the Hadi government set up a committee to investigate, but the UAE has continued to flatly deny any role in abuse against detainees. But abuses continue, we know that, and prisoners have repeatedly started hunger strikes to protest bad treatment.
The 3-year war in Yemen has caused a complete breakdown of law and order, especially in the south, where militias operate beyond the control of the courts and the internationally recognized government. In addition to the disappearances and torture, there have been reports of executions and assassinations. Diana Karim, Al Jazeera.
Well, before bringing in our guests, let's take a closer look now at the conflict in Yemen. In March 2015, Houthi rebels advanced on the capital, Sanaa, refusing to accept a new constitution proposed by President Rabbu Mansour Hadi, who was forced to leave the city. Later that month, Saudi Arabia assembled a coalition of allies, including the UAE, to support Hadi's government in what became a civil war against the Houthis. Emirati troops have fought extensively, particularly in the south around the port city of Aden. In June of 2017, the Associated Press news agency revealed the UAE was running secret prisons in Yemen, an accusation the UAE denies. Okay, let's get going. Introducing our panel to you today. Joining us from Sanaa in Yemen, we have Hussein al-Bukaiti, a pro-Houthi journalist from Toronto in Canada, Nada Hashemi, the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver, and also in Sanaa, Hakim al-Masmari, political analyst and the editor-in-chief and the publisher of the Yemen Post. Welcome to you all. Hussein al-Bukaiti in Sanaa first. How many people are we talking about here?
I think they could be in their hundreds because from the beginning of the war we have heard many reports and many claims made by some people in the south, especially from women who are claiming that their husband, their sons has been imprisoned. And it seems to be that the United Arab Emirates is using what they call the fight on Al-Qaeda so they can imprison anyone they want, and no one can ask them, or no one can dare in the south to say anything to them. And this is, to be honest, is the same what the United States has been using. They can detain anyone around the world and they can say, we are fighting Al-Qaeda. And I've seen on social media, even before this report, many protests from women and children and families of these people who has been held for months, and now some of them has exceeded 2 to 3 years. They protest in Aden, in Mukalla, in other city in the south, but there was kind of a blackout of the outside media, and the United Arab Emirates, of course, will not let any media outlet in the south to cover this crime that's done against prisoners.
Clearly, Hussein, social media is not a reliable source, and I take on board what you're saying, of course, but we maybe have to issue a little bit of a housekeeping notice here, wrapping up our entire discussion with one big allegedly. Let's go to Hakim Al-Masmari, also in Sanaa. One identifying factor here is the accents of the people who are doing the torturing. Their accents apparently come from the UAE. Are you convinced that that is factually correct?
That's the details, that the information that we received a couple of months ago, that these private prisons or secret prisons are being run by the coalition forces led by the UAE, but also with the knowledge of the U.S. government as well. But the torture has been taking place by the UAE forces and its allies. But again, this is the information that we received a couple of months ago from reliable sources or military sources who are close to the UAE forces in Aden. These are still claims and allegations. The international recognized government of President Hadi needs to investigate these cases. Sadly, their government is weak in Aden and don't have any or much authority there. But these claims are serious. They need to be taken seriously, and independent investigators must be allowed to visit these prisoners in order to see if these claims are true or not. Sometimes, even if the government does investigate, the truth is sometimes hidden. So international NGOs, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, etc., these NGOs must be given the chance to visit the prisoners in these prisons and talk to them and see what their comments are, because right now, everything is still gray. Very serious accusations, but these prisoners must be visited and be treated legally, because sometimes stupid claims or under terror, and in the end, it's not terrorism, it's just he's linked to the Muslim Brotherhood Party, the Yemen branch of Islah, or others. So it's not only investigation, but also the families must be aware where these prisoners are. Human rights organizations must visit these prisoners and listen from them and talk to them, see what their comments are, to ensure that everything that's taking place is legal and under the international law.
Nada Hashemi, in Toronto, this is clearly a war crime, but the idea of layering in on top of that sexual abuse, that gives it a whole new sinister dimension.
Right, and it's nothing, I think, that should shock anyone who studies and follows human rights practices in the Middle East. The United Arab Emirates has quite a sordid and horrific track record in terms of the use of internal repression and torture within its own territory. So now that it's actually engaging in torture outside of its territory in a location where it is actively involved in a war, comes as no surprise. This is in many ways part and parcel of a consistent policy of repression that we've seen from the United Arab Emirates, both within its own territories and other parts of the Arab world where it is deeply invested.
Hussein al-Bakati, also in Sanaa, your sources and your reporting, what are you getting the sense of in terms of how far up the command chain this is being okayed? How far up that command chain is somebody saying, yes, this is the way to go? Because presumably, at some weird level, they're justifying this to themselves by saying this is torture, it's an evolution of torture, and we're doing it to what? Extract information from people?
I mean, of course, they will say that they extract information from these people, but you have not the right to detain someone for many months without any without putting him into justice. And I think all this is to blame on Hadi government. And I want to just mention that the Minister of Interior Minister of Hadi government in Riyadh has said 2 months ago that all prisons in the south is under the control of United Arab Emirates. They are in control of the security forces of airport, of port. And this proved that the claim of the United Arab Emirates mission in Geneva, when they said about this report that there is no prison run by United Arab Emirates in Yemen, and all prisons are run by Yemeni government. And this show you that the Yemeni government actually cannot do anything to stop this. But all this blame as well is on the United Arab Emirates leadership, who actually is bringing those tactics, those prisons into Yemen. It remind us with the Guantanamo Bay. It remind us with Abu Ghraib, when United States used to take prisoners in so-called redemption flight to bring them to other country to torture. Now the United Arab Emirates is doing it exactly in Yemen. And I want just to add one thing about when I said about the social media. Social media in this time is the only platform for the ordinary people, the only platform for poor people. And we've seen the effect of social media during the Arab Spring. But why I said about the social media? Because all this report that has been said now in the Associated Press and in other agency is we have been hearing this in Yemen for 4 years. But because United Arab Emirates actually doesn't allow sometimes anyone to cover this, and during watching all programs on other TV channel about this latest report, I haven't seen anyone for example, from the south who can talk about it. Because if someone will appear, if he will mention anything against United Arab Emirates, he will be sacked. We remember one minister of Hadi government who has criticized United Arab Emirates for not letting Hadi go back and settle in Aden. His name is Salah al-Sayyadi. He was forced to resign. Another, the deputy prime minister of Bin Dagr as well, when he criticized United Arab Emirates, he was forced to resign. And his name, Abdulaziz Jubari. This show you that United Arab Emirates will use
we're getting off topic now, but I take on board what you're saying about social media. But you and I both know the reality of social media. Anyone can set up a fake account. We can never sort of, nail down the provenance of individual people as they are operating inside the echo chamber of social media. Hakeem Al-Masmari, what was your reaction this time last year almost to the US reaction when it said, well, we haven't seen any evidence of torture, we haven't seen any evidence of secret prisons?
I was surprised that they were so frank, and the reason why there's no evidence is because they're hiding the evidence. Yes, they're doing a good job in hiding the evidence, but that does not mean that it's not there. But this is expected in a country where it's lawless right now. Police governments are running the country, whether in the north or in the south, whether in Aden and Taiz or also in Sanaa. When you have a police government, that's very rare. Do you see people condemn or go against the rule of those in charge? So violations do happen, whether in the north and the south. But what we want right now is that this is very serious. A big difference between normal torture and rape, etc. It's just unbelievable that this is happening in Yemen, and while the international community is basically staying quiet because this coalition has the umbrella of the UN. So these allegations must be taken seriously. Over the last couple of months, it's been witnessed that the UAE has been trying to polish its image in Yemen, especially in the south of Yemen, after the previous claims. But this comes as a big blow. And again, these are just allegations right now and claims. We need to create an investigative committee to investigate this. This is the plan right now. Yes, the Hadi's government is weak, and because of its weakness, it cannot do that. It needs international pressure on UAE and coalition leadership to get to the bottom of this, to find out if this is real or not, and to make sure that those who were involved in such matters should be taken punished for it, because these families have hundreds and hundreds of innocent civilians with very simple claims, whether in the north or also in the south. Simple claims, and sometimes you're in prison for months and months without anyone following up for you, and while you're there, anything could happen to you. And this is the result of a non-government or a real government not being in control of the entire country.
Okay.
So these committees must be formed immediately.
We'll come on to the idea of pressure and whether people will be held accountable or not in a couple of moments. But Nada Hashemi in Toronto, first and foremost as well, there are 18 prisoners at the moment where members, very specifically, members of Al-Qaeda and ISIL are held because Yemen, the Yemeni war, is one of the most complex conflicts across the world. Wherever you go, Yemen is the high watermark of complexity, I guess. Are we saying, or can we extrapolate out what we're saying to define that this element of torture, the sexual abuse of inmates, is going on in a more widespread manner?
Well, as you correctly stated, Peter, we don't know for sure because social media is not an accurate source for judging these questions. But given past practice that the UAE is known to have engaged in terms of its own repression internally within the United Arab Emirates, and given the policy of systematic war crimes that Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been charged with in terms of how they're prosecuting the war in Yemen, I'm not surprised at all that these reports have surfaced. I suspect that when all is said and done, and when you have independent human rights investigators looking at what's happening in these prisons, the actual depth and breadth of the torture will probably be much more widespread than has been reported. And that's because exactly of what you alluded to a moment ago with the previous guest in Sanaa, that the constraints that previously existed on the United Arab Emirates in terms of the United States' policy toward the region and toward the UAE and specifically have been lifted. The Trump administration, openly backs the war in Yemen. Donald Trump, during the campaign for president, openly claimed that he supported torture. And so now the UAE feels it's in the driver's seat. It can do whatever it wants. There will be no constraints placed on it, and it can just carry on in this reckless way, regardless of the consequences.
Hussein al-Bakati, proving allegations is one thing. Bordering on near impossible. Mr. Hadi, this time last year, in the aftermath of the original AP revelations and claims, Mr. Hadi had promised an inquiry. Where do you think that will go?
We have an experience with President Hadi, even when he was in Sanaa before, like 2 years before the war. We have seen many Al-Qaeda attack and many crimes like that attack on a hospital in Sanaa that killed and injured over 100 doctors and patients and nurses. He said, we will investigate that. They held some of the people who were responsible of that. And since then, we haven't heard anything of that. This is all what has been happening in Yemen. They always make, as they say, a committee to investigate, but this committee will never ever see the light. And even if there was a committee formed only on the media, then the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi-led coalition will not let the results of this committee to come to light because this will damage them. And I don't think that the United Arab Emirates will let anyone which is under their support or someone who they are backing, they will never ever let him damage the reputation. And as I mentioned, 2 of the ministers who criticized them, they will forced to resign, and this will be to anyone. And if Hadi dare actually to condemn directly the United Arab Emirates, then I think he cannot stay in power. They can just replace him by any way, as they did with those ministers and the former prime ministers during the war in Yemen.
Nada Hashemi in Toronto, coming to you again. There is this base, the Barika base. Apparently, reportedly, allegedly, US personnel were sent there. Part of the murkiness of this surely is that depending upon which website you look at, depending upon which bit of social media you catch up with, they are either there in a semi-official role or they are mercenaries, and nobody is telling anybody else whether they are or they're not.
You're right. We don't have the full picture here, but I suspect the United States is deeply aware that torture is taking place at these prison sites, and that the Obama and that the Trump administration is actually, looking the other way. In other words, endorsing these types of practices because it effectively has the Trump administration, that is, has the exact same regional view and the exact same interpretation of the conflict in Yemen as the United Arab Emirates does and as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia does. So the United States, I think, is deeply complicit. We don't know the extent and the depth of the complicity, but that can only be determined after an independent investigation.
Hakeem Al-Masmari, the US Defense Secretary should report back by about, I think it's August the 12th, 13th, 14th-ish, because in the middle of May of this year, he was given the job of actually coming up with a definitive take on what is going on in Yemen. Given that it's so murky, given that there's black operations going on in the country and it's so complex, what are the chances that he actually has enough time to put together an accurate interpretation?
It's not a matter of time, it's the matter of will. Do they have the will to take this seriously? Right now, the problem in Yemen is that very, very limited media outlets, international media outlets, are allowed to enter Yemen, whether in the north or the south. So the lack of international presence, whether human rights organizations or international media, this gives these sides who are in control a green light to react freely because there is no pressure. Right now, if we want to go forward with this, the first step is not to let President Hadi create an inquiry commission. The UN must take a stance and announce that to open an investigation on this and allow human rights organizations to visit these prisons and investigate. That's if you want this matter to be taken seriously. So it's not a matter of time. There's a lot of time, but is there a will? The government knows of many of the practices that are happening in the south of Yemen that are illegal, but at times, as your guest said, Trump is with it. President Trump is with it and does not reject it. And at the same time, this will also hurt the U.S. reputation. So they have to stand aside. The UN must take a strong stance. And then from there, the UN creates an independent committee to investigate and visit these prisons, because you cannot count on President Hadi and his government. As we all know, they are weak in the south and have no authority as of now.
Hussein al-Bakati, what are the chances here that the UN does something? This time yesterday on this programme, we were discussing the way that the United States has pulled out of the UN Human Rights Council. So arguably the Council never had enough teeth anyway, and the UN is kind of fighting lots of different fronts here.
The UN and the Human Rights Council is actually cannot do anything because if they try to form any investigation team to be sent in Yemen, like they tried in Geneva a year ago, it was blocked by the United States and by UK and by other country, and United States has appointed the Saudi to head the human rights panel in Geneva during the war in Yemen. So I don't think the United Nations can do anything, because if they couldn't do anything to investigate all crimes done in Yemen, either by the Houthi or by the Saudi-led coalition, and which is in much bigger than what's happening now in those prison. I don't think that anything will happen in the future. And I want to just add one more important thing. We have seen those plastic plates where those prisoners in the United Arab Emirates prison have drawn how they are subject to sexual torture and sexual harassment. It shows you that they maybe have smuggled the pen inside. They have no paper, and they took a risk to smuggle this outside the prison. And just imagine if nothing will not be done to those people in those prisons. This means that the United Arab Emirates will triple their sexual torture to those people, because they will try to find out who has drawn this, who has brought them out. And I'm calling the United Nations to do something, because if they don't do anything, then this means that this report will backfire, and it will result in more torture for all those people who are in prison in South Yemen.
Nada Hashemi, what are the chances that anybody is ever held accountable for this?
Well, I think the likelihood is quite minimal, but I think it's directly proportional to this story gaining greater global visibility and publicity. And I think one way forward of really trying to mitigate these types of gross human rights abuses is to really try and get the United States Senate to get involved. For those people following the conflict in Yemen, the United States, particularly the Senate, has been very outspoken, critical of the U.S. role in supporting the Emiratis and the Saudi war effort in Yemen. Earlier this year, the Senate came very close to passing a resolution blocking American assistance to the Saudi and Emirati war effort in Yemen. So there's several senators, led by Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut and Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who are very principled on the question of Yemen. If they were to, I think, take this issue on, they have the opportunity and the possibility of holding congressional hearings, inviting people from the State Department, from the White House, from the Pentagon, and asking them pointed questions. To what extent is the United States involved in these types of tortures? That could shine a global spotlight on these abuses that might lead to their mitigation.
Gentlemen, we are out of time. Thank you to all our guests today, Hussein al-Bakati, Nada Hashemi and Hakim al-Masmari, and thank you to you too for watching the programme. You can see the show again anytime via the website, aljazeera.com. And for more discussion, check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter at AJ Inside Story, or tweet me. I'm at Peter Dobby1. From me, Peter Dobby, and the entire team here in Doha, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.